Good morning, everyone. For those who are joined us here in person, we're going to get our program started. So if everyone can please take their seats. My name is Matt Ewalt. I serve the Texas Tribune as Senior Director of Events and Live Journalism. Welcome to those joining us in person here in El Paso for our day-long symposium titled, What Can the Rest of Texas Learn from El Paso? If I could just have those who are gathered here in person please take their seats. Thank you so much. As a city that shows us what the future of Texas will look like, how can El Paso help other Texas communities plan for the future? What are the lessons learned in education, healthcare, business, immigration that can help navigate demographic changes and build thriving economies, strong workforces, and healthy communities throughout the state? With 5 panels planned for today here at Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center, El Paso, we'll consider these questions with key community leaders. Our panels will run 1 hour with time for questions from those joining us in person and online. Here in El Paso, we have a mic for our in-person audience stationed right over here. And our virtual audience can submit questions online at our Q&A portal at texastribune.org/ask. That's texastribune.org/ask. And please note that we'll have a 30-minute break for lunch from 12:15 to 12:45. And for those joining us online or even here in person, note that all 5 of our panels will be available to watch on the Texas Tribune website, so you can always catch up on any conversations that you've missed. We can't do this work without the support of our sponsors. Our major sponsors include Raise Your Hand Texas, Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, Walmart, Texas Cultural Trust, Every Texan, HCA Healthcare, and Las Palmas del Sol Healthcare. Supporting sponsors are Paso del Norte Health Foundation, El Paso Community College, the Law Office of Carlos Eduardo Cardenas, Microsoft, TechSpark, and Creed. Our foundation sponsor is the Henry Luce Foundation. We're also grateful to our media partner for today's symposium, El Paso Matters. On behalf of my Tribune colleagues, I also want to thank all those throughout the state of Texas who support the impactful journalism of the Tribune, including those who have become members. To learn more and to become a member, visit texastribune.org/support. And tickets are now on sale for Texas's breakout politics and policy event, the Texas Tribune Festival, which returns to downtown Austin from September 5th through 7th. Join us for 3 days of unforgettable conversations about the issues that matter to Texans at our annual celebration of big, bold ideas. Purchase your tickets at tribfest.org. And before we turn the program over to our first panel, we want to thank Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center El Paso for hosting our conversation today, and offering a welcome is Vice President of University Advancement, Dr. Andrea Tani.
Matt had to adjust that just a little bit, so thank you. I appreciate it. Welcome to our campus. We're so excited. This is the first time Texas Tech Health El Paso is able to host Texas Tribune. We know that you've been down the road, down I-10, at our friendly institution, UTEP, and so today is a proud day for Texas Tech Health El Paso. And we're so glad to see so many community members and a few of our elected officials as well. I think are you going to do introductions of our electeds? Okay, I won't steal thunder. No. I don't want to mess up any who are here. But we are just so thankful. Truthfully, this campus would not exist if it not for our community leaders, our elected officials, and our business community as well. Our story is a great one to tell because we were really raised up by the community for our community. And in offering the welcome, I want to share just a brief story about why Texas Tech Health El Paso exists. We saw a need in our community to grow our own future healthcare leaders who look like our community, who quite frankly look like the rest of what our community is going to look like across the U.S. Increasingly growing Hispanic population and those who are multilingual. So over 13 years ago now, our campus evolved, started with just really a Foster School of Medicine. And again, our local community leaders stepped up in a big way with philanthropic dollars to leverage with the state. And we would not exist, all of our schools would not exist if not for them. We're very, very fortunate to be the home of really not just growing our own future healthcare leaders and being a Hispanic serving institution. In fact, the only health Hispanic serving institution on the US-Mexico border that we're very proud of. But also our staff and our faculty look very similar to our community. Over 71% of our staff are Hispanic. Over 50% of our students are Hispanic and from underrepresented backgrounds in the healthcare field. And quite frankly, the majority are first-generation college students. Over 30% hail from our region, El Paso and West Texas, our student base. So again, we are truly committed to the mission of growing our own. In terms of what we never thought would kind of happen and grow so immensely over the past 13, 14 years is our economic impact. Our annual economic impact on this campus to the region is over $634 million. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. Seriously, that's a huge deal for our region. Additionally, in addition to the economic impact that I mentioned earlier, we also have over 2,000 employees here, as I shared what our demographic looks like. I don't think we ever could have imagined that we would have such a huge economic impact that continues to grow. Again, we will graduate our first dental school class in 2025. We now have the nursing school, the medical school, the graduate school of biomedical sciences, and our first graduating school, a class of dentists next year. It's amazing to see the growth alone on our campus. So I won't take up too much of Matt's time in moving on to the next session, but again, I just want to welcome you. I want to also ask, who has been on our campus before? Okay, my goal is that every time we hold a session on this campus is that every single hand is raised. So again, if you ever want to host a community organization, if you want to host your teams, if you want to use this campus, this is your campus. This room holds 500 and can be broken into fours. We love to host our community on our campus, and we do so very often. So again, consider this your campus. Consider yourself honorary Red Raiders, and also our advocates and our greatest champions to bring others to our campus, because this belongs to our community. So again, welcome. Thank you, Texas Tribune, for entrusting in us to host you all for the first time, and have a great rest of your day on our beautiful campus.
Thank you so much. Let's get to our first panel of the day with a conversation titled "The Significance of El Paso to Texas and Its Future." As I'm introducing our panelists, I welcome the panel to join the stage. There are stairs. Our first panel features longtime El Paso-based journalists talking about what they've learned from covering this border community. What are the challenges they've seen, and how do you cover the challenges alongside the successes? Bob Moore leads El Paso Matters, a nonprofit news organization he founded that began publishing in February 2020. Alfredo Corchado, executive editor and correspondent for Puente News Collaborative, a binational partnership of news organizations in Ciudad Juarez and El Paso. Angela Cocherda is a news editor at public radio KTEP and a multimedia editor at El Paso Matters. And our moderator, Zaida Torres, is the senior editor for the ProPublica Texas Tribune Investigative Unit, a first-of-its-kind collaboration to publish investigative reporting for and about Texas. And I just let the panel know your microphones are on, so no need to press a button or anything else. And we'll turn the program over to Zaida.
Thank you all for joining us. I think we're all very happy to be here with you. I'm proud El Pasoan, continue to live here. And all of our panelists together, they're gonna hate that I'm saying this, but we were talking about this the other day and have a total experience of 100 years in this field. Uh, so I'm sure they love that I said that out loud. But I think this is an issue that's really important to us. It's also one that's very large in scope, so we'll try to get to multiple areas and hopefully help kind of set up some of the conversations that are going to dig much more deeply into specific topics. But I thought one place we could start is, I know this is going to be a bit difficult to do, but we're going to dig much more deeply as we continue the conversation. So I thought one place we could start is to pick one key lesson that you believe El Paso has and can contribute to the rest of the state and the country. It doesn't have to be the most important one. It could just be the first one that comes to your head. And talk a bit about that in about a minute or so, just to kind of set the stage for our conversation. So, Bob, I'm looking at you, so I'll start with you.
Thanks. I think the thing that has always sort of impressed me about El Paso, and it sounds corny, but it's going to be true, is the people here and sort of the strength of people who have who live in what is in some cases an isolated community. It's certainly isolated from the rest of the state. It's a low income, low wealth community. But the people here are still very giving. And I think that has really shown during times when we've had humanitarian crises in El Paso over recent years, when tens of thousands of migrants come to our community. The response is to line up to help feed them and to care for them. And that's not to say that El Paso is a community that is unanimous on migration issues. We have political differences like any other community. But the reaction in El Paso when presented with the humanitarian crisis is, we're going to feed people today. We'll talk about the politics tomorrow. And I think that is repeated throughout everyday experience in El Paso.
So building on what Bob said, I really do think El Paso has a lot of tolerance, a lot of mutual respect for each other. Part of it is the isolation, because we know we have to depend on each other and we see each other as neighbors. I also think those of you who are from here know this, but people who are watching from elsewhere or visiting, we offer a peek into the future. It's a very young population. A lot of people are bilingual, dual language, bicultural often, and even binational since we're on the border. And that really has been a strength for us. That's our superpower. In some ways, we tell our students, I teach a multimedia journalism class with the wonderful Professor Kate Gannon, and we tell our students that they may not realize that, but these are strengths, and that is a strength for Texas. Some people may look and think, oh, that looks scary. But the future's here. We're living it right now, and the world hasn't come to an end. And you're going to hear during this symposium why there is a lot that El Paso can teach the rest of Texas and even the rest of the country, because it's happening right here, right now.
First of all, I want to thank Saida and the Texas Tribune for the invitation. I'm a son of a bracero and a son of a woman who worked the fields of California, who believed that America needed to be fed, and worked throughout the San Joaquin Valley. We're from Durango, Mexico, San Luis de Cordero, Bravo. But I think what I've learned is I've learned through the eyes of my parents, through how my parents see this community. And I've learned about humility, and I've learned about a sense of mutual respect and dignity. These are things that I think are in short supply in other parts of the state, especially Austin. But this is what I've learned with it as a kid, that El Paso is a place for second chances. And I'm a high school dropout, but my parents believed that this was a place that if I only listened to them and I left the fields of California, I could come to El Paso and get an education, because people here, brown people, wore ties, they wore suits. I forgot my tie today, but that was something that they really instilled in me, was this is a place where you can become someone. And so I take that lesson to heart.
Alfredo, I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit. One of the things we often talk about is that when you're from El Paso, and you're talking to people at a state level or at a national level, it's not as if you cannot discuss the issue of immigration. Even though El Paso is so much more than, immigration. And, you've long been a critic of, this coverage that kind of paints El Paso in a broad brush. And leads, at least for many of us, leads to questions. For me, just recently, some of the first questions I heard when I was talking to some people from not just Texas, but at the national level were, is it dangerous? And in the context of immigration, tell me about the chaos, right? Some version of tell me about the chaos. And I wonder how you explain the nuance of this place and the things that this place taught you and taught your parents when you're dealing with, to some degree, an audience that gets a lot of their information in sound bites.
I worked at Dallas Morning News for more than 30 years. I left the Morning News this year to take on a new challenge, Puente News Collaborative. And part of the reason was that I wanted to give back to my community. I wanted to give back to the border, El Paso, Juarez, but really the entire border, San Diego, Tijuana, all the way to Brownsville, Reynosa, Matamoros. I just flew in late last night. I spent the day in the beautiful city of Austin and came back to El Paso on my night 10, and I see the X on the highway. And it always happens when I come in late at night. I kind of welled up. I kind of get emotional about it because it is really one community. But one of the things that that I wanted to do differently was I saw the clickbait phenomena where you write stories about the chaos, the conflict, the confusion on the border, and I wanted to expand, get out of that, and write maybe deeper stories, more in-depth stories, more nuanced stories about the border. One thing I always realize, and I think Angela and I do a lot of interviews together, but you talk to immigrants or migrants who are coming north, and you realize a sense of hypocrisy that the majority of these people you interview already have jobs waiting for them in the United States. They have they're part of a network who are trying to push them to North Carolina, Tennessee, Dallas, because there are jobs waiting for them. And you got to keep that in perspective and context. I mean, I remember as a kid in the San Joaquin Valley where the ranchers will come to our house after work and they say, hey, that was a really good day. You guys finished so many rows. Do you have more family members or friends back in Durango that you can call and bring them up here? Because you guys are invaluable. And it's something that I take today, especially when El Paso, the border has become a political theater, is that you realize just the hypocrisy behind a lot of that policy, and you try to reflect that in your reporting. The nuance of it, the context, the perspective that's out there.
Angela, you mentioned earlier in the first question, you talked about isolation. And a bit more broadly, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what that isolation and remoteness has taught us in terms of, successes, what we've learned from that. And then are there other successes that you see that have come from, our experience here in El Paso that could be transferable?
Yeah, because we're so isolated, we do have to depend on each other. And there is this frontier spirit in the region, not just El Paso, Juarez, even Las Cruces, New Mexico, the whole area. And I think it's a combination of Mexican ingenuity of trying, you have to fix something, you're going to get it done. You have an entrepreneurial spirit, and also this idea that we can't wait for Mexico City or Washington or Austin to solve our problems. So people will look for their own solutions. And the border is not necessarily a problem the way everyone views it, probably away from here. It does offer lots of solutions for people in El Paso. And I'll give you a few examples. I mean, we all know about people going across to find lower cost prescription drugs. But because we're so underinsured here, or maybe don't have insurance, families, generations have gone into Mexico to see doctors. And I know Texas Tech is working on that problem of us not having enough doctors here, so thank you. But in the meantime, people do have family doctors in Mexico, so they're able to get care. I mean, there is an innovation, if any of you have been to Mexico, a lot of the pharmacies, Dr. Simi, which is a great little character who is about generic medicine, similar types of medicine. They have a doctor right next door, and for 50, I think it's 50 pesos now, which is just a matter of a few dollars. You can get a
It
consultation.
went up by 25 pesos.
Okay, so very affordable. Now, you're obviously not going to go there for a serious illness, but for everyday things you need help with. And I understand some pharmacies in the U.S. are looking at that model, so that's something that could be duplicated. The other thing is promotoras, which are health outreach specialists, very well known throughout Mexico. These are people who are respected in their communities, the comadres everybody goes to for advice. They are very key in outreach and preventative care, and that's something the rest of Texas, I think, is looking at as a model, and some places are doing, in order to reduce healthcare costs. Engineering, we have engineers that are trained on both sides of the border, work in maquiladoras or the manufacturing plants, and we have some engineers who've been innovative in the auto, and now aerospace is our big industry. We're going to be creating that next generation coming out of this region. So there's a lot that Texas can benefit from. Mexico has a thriving aerospace manufacturing sector. So I think, we don't look at the border as a problem. We look at it as not either or, but more. Both individually we can feel like we're more, but we can create and build more from this region.
Andrea Tani was talking a bit about Texas Tech's efforts to really, reflect the demographics of this community. And it made me think a bit about the former state demographer, Steve Murdoch, who sadly passed away last year, but who spent almost an entire career giving pretty much the same presentation, right? It was a presentation that talked about how, in 2050, Texas is going to be majority Latino, 50% Latino. I think we're at like 40% right now. And his argument was, we need to prepare now. We need to prepare to provide people better educational opportunities so that, it is, the state itself becomes successful. And basically the gist of it was, demographics is destiny, but we can also plan for that destiny. And I'm curious, Bob, you've spent a very long time looking at educational outcomes here in El Paso, looking at kind of the trends of the workforce. You're going to moderate a panel later on this, but since you'll be asking the questions there, I think it might be a good opportunity to talk about what you've seen.
And we will go more into depth with some of the panelists, but if you go back 30 years, when Dr. Murdoch started going around the state making these presentations, we had this huge gap in student performance between Anglo students and Latino students. And because El Paso was a majority Hispanic community, almost trending toward almost an exclusive Hispanic community in the schools, we were kind of exhibit A on what happened when you have those gaps. And it's not because Hispanic students are any less smart, and that was one of the things that Murdoch would always stress. It's just that the opportunities were not there. Border schools were massively underfunded, both at K through 12 and higher ed. So the state made some deliberate investments over time to address those problems, and there was success in closing some of these gaps. We have not gotten all of the way there, and the pandemic was a big setback because it disproportionately affected low-income communities and communities of color. But I think there is now an effort to retreat from any of that progress that we've made, whether it's the voucher system that would fund schools, and I think it's telling that Governor Abbott, every time he went to a school to promote this, went to a private Christian school. Those are not the kinds of schools that low-income Hispanic kids are going to benefit from primarily, and it's going to take more money out of the existing education system. And we're already starting to see that in El Paso and I think other communities across Texas, where you have school districts that are beginning to run very large deficits because some levels of state funding aren't coming through. You have this tremendous challenge of teacher retention right now, where statewide we're losing 10% of teachers every year, and the number's higher in El Paso. And so as we begin to back away from that and label efforts like Murdoch talked about as DEI or whatever the dirty word is of the day, I'm really worried that progress that we've made over the last 30 years is going to rapidly erode before we ever even get close to the finish line.
Talk a bit about, I'm curious on something you said, which is that a voucher system that would benefit private Christian schools is not necessarily something that's going to help Latino children in impoverished communities. We know that the next legislative session is going to dominate the conversation in the next legislative session. We know it is a big, big push for the governor. Why do you think that, a system like that would not benefit people in communities like El Paso?
First of all, there's not an infrastructure here. We don't have a large number of private schools. The Catholic Church has a longstanding education system here that's very small. There are a number of small private Christian schools here, but there's just not enough to affect that. The second, and I think probably more important issue to consider is the ability to attend a school distant from your home requires a large amount of privilege. You have to have transportation to get you there. You have to have a parent who's not going to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, hours before you have to be at school. So those are the kinds of impediments that don't benefit these families. And we don't have to just hypothesize on this. There's data from other states where this has happened, and what vouchers have done has tended to just reinforce people who are already making the choice to go to those schools. It just lowers the cost to them and shifts that cost onto taxpayers, taking that money out of the public schools. So I haven't seen any strong evidence that shows that the types of children we have in El Paso and in other border communities are going to benefit from that kind of educational savings account or whatever you want to call the program.
We've talked a bit about some of the successes that El Paso has given and could show the state, and Bob has hit a bit at some of the challenges. I wonder, either for Angela or Alfredo, are there other challenges that we've seen in El Paso that people could learn from? Whether we've overcome them or are still pushing through that.
Well, I mean, I think looking at the future labor force, the challenges are, making sure you have a well-educated, people can afford education, healthy, and labor force. And we'd love to have more people stay in El Paso, but, the opportunities and the salaries aren't here. So Texas has to look at, not just in El Paso, again, I said this is kind of where we have our young labor force, but across the state, what are you doing to take care of your future workforce? Because I have this idea, down the road, maybe one of these people in power now will be in a nursing home or assisted living, and who do you think will be caring for them? Hopefully, might be one of the immigrants that they were trying to keep out. but also that, you know, the scientists, we know dreamers are very highly represented in healthcare, and all of the innovation that we want so much for this state. We have to take care of, and not take care of in a benevolent way, but we're taking care of ourselves by making sure we are caring for our Texans who live here along the border in El Paso.
I think what comes to mind is really voting. I mean, El Paso has one of the lowest, and Bob would have the percentage, but one of the lowest turnouts in the state. It's a majority minority Hispanic population, but when you go out to the when there's an election, it reminds you of the challenges ahead. I mean, we might be this, we might be that, but until you really start voting, you are just that. I mean, your theater, your political theater. People can come in and raise money off of you, show the the chaos on the border, and get more funding, etc. And that's because people don't turn out to vote. I mean, that's a huge lesson for El Paso, but really a big lesson for the rest of Texas, I think.
Bob, do you want to hit at that a bit too? I mean, you've followed voting trends for some time. What do you see?
So just to set the stage, we're about to enter into a presidential election where El Paso will be a primary issue debated by the rest of the country, and it will not be an accurate portrayal of what's happening here. Despite El Paso being primary focus of the last two presidential elections and now 2024, I can safely predict and sadly predict that by the time all the votes are counted in El Paso, only about 40 to 45% of the eligible voters in El Paso will have cast a ballot this fall. The immediate response is going to be, we're going to condemn all of those people who didn't vote for being apathetic or whatever. But here, I think, is the reality. I think most people in El Paso don't participate in elections because they're not asked, and they don't feel welcome, and they don't feel like they're a part of it. You have one party with the Democrats that have largely taken Latino voters for granted and don't work hard for their votes. The Republican Party in El Paso in particular is largely non-existent. There's not much of an infrastructure there. They don't even really work at trying to get people out to vote. We don't have an NGO infrastructure. We have some very good NGOs here, but they're not large enough to be able to make an impact. And we're going to have local candidates running for office who are going to run campaigns that will involve going down the voter list, finding everybody that's voted in the last three elections and talking to them. They won't talk to the young 20-year-old just out of high school who's never voted in an election before, may not fully understand the process. So there are and there are some barriers that are deliberately put into place to block people from voting. So Texas, I mean, the simple way to think of this is Texas nationally is at the bottom of the states when it comes to turnout, and the border is at the bottom of Texas. That's not an accident. And I would just suggest that it is a mistake to cast the blame on people who have been excluded from the process for not participating.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, you're speaking to a crowd right now that is very engaged. I'm curious about what is the solution, not just like the solution for the community and what the community can do, but what should the state be doing?
I think a lot of it's going to have to come from the ground up. I think the one thing we should not count on is the political party solving this issue for us. I think we're going to have business organizations, civic organizations, NGOs kind of come together and decide that this is a problem we want to address. Even though, as Alfredo said, we've had this long history of low voter participation in El Paso, it has never risen to the level of the top concerns in the community that we want to address. And as Alfredo said, I don't think you fix anything else until you fix that. We have to, there's two ways to make your voice heard in a democracy. One is with votes and one is with money. We don't have much of either in El Paso, and I think the chances of improving our voter turnout are a lot better than counting on everybody in El Paso winning Powerball over the next few years and suddenly becoming wealthy. So I think we have to really focus as a community on that turnout issue, and how do we engage people, talk to people who aren't voting, hear from them about what it will take to get them to vote. Some of it's as simple as people don't understand the process and they're intimidated by driving somewhere and looking at a machine. We need to demystify that process to begin with. But there are a number of steps, but it has to start with a commitment from the community itself. Texas is not going to solve this problem for us. There's a disincentive for state leadership to try to solve the problem for us. So we have to own this problem ourselves.
Well, I would just say Bob does a great voter guide, El Paso Matters, and that helps demystify some of the candidates. But also, when he looks at the data, and he can spell this out more, we have a very high disproportionate number of people, older people. By older, I say, what, over 70 or 80 voting?
So in the most recent primary election, El Paso had more voters over 85 than under 30.
So I try and tell our students, you've got a bunch of older people making all your decisions for you, and maybe appeal to that. And here's where you can learn more information about the issues, because these issues do affect your everyday life. People feel disconnected. They don't understand how voting really can make a difference.
I think also the challenge that we face as journalists is the disinformation, the misinformation that happens day to day, especially in the Spanish language community. We're in a time where every 12 years there's elections in Mexico and elections in the U.S., presidential elections. And sometimes just watching, one of my hobbies is to try to watch the news with my parents every day in the afternoon. So you watch Univision, and sometimes you switch to Telemundo, and you switch to other channels. But you see the information that they're getting, and you realize just the task that you have as a journalist to try to help both communities. I mean, both cities. I came of age at a time as a journalist when the PAN in Ciudad Juárez and Chihuahua, they were able to kick the PRI out, and you see that that sense of energy, that sense of courage, that happened through northern Mexico and then spread throughout the country, and you realize, I mean, your families, I mean, they really kind of live through the prism of both countries. I mean, they're watching both countries, but my parents fit that motto. I mean, they're 83, 84, 87, and they're the first ones who want to vote.
They're young voters in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, they're the first that want to vote, and then they want to go to the consulado in El Paso to also cast their votes. But it's a lesson to the rest of my siblings, the younger ones, to try to get them to participate.
And by consulado is because Mexico has an election too, and if you're a dual citizen, you can vote in both. So nothing illegal going on there.
Right. Thank you, Angela.
You've talked a little bit about the Mexican elections, the U.S. elections, which brings us back to, I think, what Angela said earlier, which is this isolation, right, that El Paso has and that Juarez has from, their governments, whether it's their state governments or their U.S. government. Can you talk a little bit, Alfredo, since you brought it up, can you talk a little bit about what those we have two presidential elections, the one in Mexico, the one in the U.S. What do they mean to these communities, and how should we be paying attention to them?
This is a moment for a plug. We're at the Dallas Morning News. We were the only paper for the longest time to do polling in Mexico. Every election since Cedillo in '94, we would do a poll about where Mexico stands and what the elections in Mexico meant for Texans. We are Puente News Collaborators is about to do a poll early May to find out attitudes about the United States, attitudes about immigration. There's a lot of talk about nearshoring, even though this community has been nearshoring, I guess, since its founding. I mean, some people say since 64, 65 with the Maquila. but nearshoring, and then the whole issue of security. I mean, I think one of the stories that kind of gets away from us at times is the number of Mexicans who are migrating because of the security situation. There have been times and seasons where I think the number of migrants coming across the border was really from Mexico, in Nogales, and I think it's shifted now to Del Rio. So these are stories that have a huge impact on both countries. The way Mexicans see the United States. As a journalist, it used to be that young Mexican journalists saw the United States as a place to learn about journalism and the protection as a journalist. That's not the case anymore. I mean, there's a sense of you guys are going back in time. And just the overall, the economy, I mean, going back to security, if you have 50, 60 truck drivers a day who are being held up, and that means that the stuff you're trying to buy at Walmart or Target is going to get here, it'll be delayed, and oftentimes the prices go up. So it has an impact on the pocketbooks. And so you want to bring these issues up so that that Mexico doesn't feel as isolated as it does. I mean, as a reporter, to cover the border, it means to look at the story in an international way. It's not just a binational story, but it's really an international story. So that's why we do these polls, to try to kind of get a sense of where Mexico is today and where Mexico is going. And I mean, I came of age as a reporter covering the PRI, which was an authoritarian government. In many ways, I see the same situation today with the government of López Obrador. Manuel Andrés López Obrador from Morena, it's like going back to the PRI, and that has huge consequences for this country.
I want to open it up to questions soon, but I'm curious about each of your thoughts on, we've talked about different challenges, different successes, things people could learn. Are folks outside of El Paso listening?
Well, most people here that this is, if they've never been here, it's this edge of Texas, no man's land with hordes of criminals coming across. Obviously, that's not the case. These are all vibrant communities on the border. And I think that everything is being looked at through the prism of the migration issues. And we have a panel a little later today that will delve into all that with experts on the ground and legislatively. But it's tough during an election year because everybody thinks, they don't look at Mexico or the border as something positive, and Texas benefits greatly. So it's really tough to get past that initial feeling that, everything's dangerous, chaos, crisis, and what's actually happening here. So I don't know that they're listening. I hope this symposium helps a few more people listen and pay attention.
This will be somewhat of a self-serving message, and I'll admit that up front. One of the reasons that Texas and the rest of the country isn't listening is because we're not telling stories from here. We have a local journalism infrastructure in El Paso, not unlike most other communities, that has just collapsed. We don't have, when I was started as the editor at the El Paso Times in 2011, Zaire and I were working together at the time, and we were part of a newsroom of 60 people or so. Today, the El Paso Times newsroom is something around 10. We've been able to build up some infrastructure with El Paso Matters and help to tell some of these stories. But our story in El Paso has gotten nationalized. And so the only time people hear about El Paso is when the media decides to parachute in and tell a story and distort the hell out of it and then leave. I will credit the Texas Tribune. They actually have a reporter based in El Paso. That is a rarity. So the only time people in Texas are going to hear about El Paso is when national media decide that we're now the center of the migration crisis again. So one of the things we have to do in El Paso is build ways to tell our own stories better. Journalism is one tool for that, and I think we need to build that up. But I was talking with my friend Liz O'Hara, who's a recovering journalist herself, now working for Texas Gas Service. We've got to figure out a way as a community to tell our story more effectively and not do it in a defensive way. And I think that's kind of our instinct, is to be defensive about it. We have a very positive, proactive story that we can tell, while acknowledging, I think, that we do have a number of challenges. The challenges we actually have here generally aren't the ones that you're hearing about on national media.
Just real quick, I'll add, public radio is one growth area, and we have a collaboration of Texas public radio stations in Texas called the Texas Newsroom, and we do share stories up and down the border. We do want to expand the kind of stories. That's my constant battle. It's not just about immigration or migration or crisis. So there are more opportunities, at least through public radio, to tell those stories regionally and nationally.
And I too want to congratulate the
We're
Texas
doing
Tribune.
a lot of self-nods today.
No, the Texas Tribune for I met their editors yesterday, and they will have not just one reporter here in El Paso. I mean, they've had him for a while. Uriel Garcia was an amazing reporter, but they will also have a reporter in Eagle Pass and in the Valley in Brownsville, and that's I mean, self-serving, but it's not really self-serving. I think it serves all of us. I mean, one of the things we're trying to do at Puente News Collaborative is try to, you can't overlook the issues in Mexico, whether it's corruption, whether it's migration, et cetera. But one of the things we're trying to do at Puente News Collaborative is try to change the narrative and focus on other stories without letting those stories, without ignoring those stories. But a lot of stories about trade, for example. I mean, we want to tell stories that will reach the audience in the Midwest, in Michigan, in Ohio, in Indiana, in Pennsylvania. Why does the border matter to you? How does the border impact? Because the border has become more than just a geographical place. I mean, the border is a mindset. And I travel around the country and I tell people where I'm from, and oftentimes people tell me who I am, because of what they hear, because of what they see and what they read. So I'm trying to work with journalists across Mexico to tell the story about El Bajío, central Mexico, Querétaro, Guanajuato, et cetera, and try to run these stories across Mexico too. And then take those stories and tell the audience beyond the border, how does the border impact you beyond the issue of immigration? And even immigration, I mean, there are towns in Iowa, for example, that are trying to find ways to get beyond the rhetoric to try to hire more workers because they're running out of workers. But these are the stories that I think we have to tell. We have to, and because of the news stations, because of the lack of resources that we have as reporters, we have to collaborate. We have to find other partners to collaborate with. Nostalgia, but Angela and I were once part of a bureau in Mexico City with 12 staff members, including a driver, including translators. Angela was there with reporters and a photographer for television, and we had reporters covering the culture, the immigration, organized crime, et cetera. I mean, zero today. I mean, the Dallas Morning News has no one in Mexico, and this is one of the biggest papers in the country. I mean, there are no papers with presence in Mexico, whether it's San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, Chicago, Atlanta, San Jose. I mean, some of the major communities that really have a big stake in Mexico, or Mexico has a stake in them. I mean, so it's a huge task, but we're trying to find partners to collaborate and tell those stories that I think are getting away from us.
In many ways, I mean, I do think the collaboration is one of the things that we have learned as journalists as the industry has, gotten smaller and smaller, which is it truly has been a benefit to work with other reporters and really kind of pool resources to cover communities in ways that we didn't do before. That said, it's much fewer people now. But I wanted to open it up to anyone in the audience. I could certainly ask more questions, but in the back.
On the subject of
Oh.
Can you state your name too?
My name is Eric McNabb, and on the subject of quality journalism and disinformation in the region, in El Paso, we have two bad faith right-wing propaganda outlets that promote a lot of disinformation in our community, KFOX and CBS4 Local. If you visit their Facebook pages or websites on any given day, you'll see for every one local news story they share, there are about 5 bad faith stories promoting purposely misleading narratives about crime, immigrants, and the national economy. Right-wing culture war attacks. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I was just getting to it. And yeah, this is what their parent company, Sinclair Broadcasting Group, demands. And I was wondering, is it possible to have journalistic integrity while working for these outlets if the local reporting done by a reporter is honest? And to what degree is the journalistic integrity of the local producers, anchors, and reporters at Sinclair affiliates compromised? And what can we do to reduce the harmful impact these outlets have on our culture and democracy here in El Paso?
I think we let the professor and news director take this one.
Well, I would say I'm not in that newsroom, so I don't know. I wouldn't question the personal integrity of the reporters. I know you're saying that they probably have a hard time. I would say as viewers and readers, speak up. Turn off the channel if you don't like it. Don't look at the website. Facebook is hard to control. People get comments from all over, and they probably should do a better job as gatekeepers. But if you feel the stories on the air are not reflective of reality, everyone, mobilize viewers and El Pasoans to say this is not reflecting our community here. Unfortunately, crime and fear do put eyes on the television or on the phone because people are like, oh, it's just a natural instinct. But it is our responsibility to try and pressure news organizations you feel are not meeting their commitment to local audiences to do their job. And you have more power than you think to express that and to pressure.
There are good journalists at those stations, and just in full disclosure, Robert Olguin, who's one of the anchors there, is a good friend of ours, so I have some admitted bias there. I think the bigger problem with local television and local media generally is there aren't enough people there. The thing I'm concerned about with those two TV stations is they have like a combined total of 4 news reporters out in the field every day. That's the real problem that's facing local communities. And that's not to diminish the impact of corporate journalism that tries to use its platform for political influence. But I think for communities like El Paso, the biggest problem is we don't have enough boots on the ground.
So just a reminder for those in the room, you're welcome to come on up and ask questions. We have about 15 minutes or so for questions. Also, for those who are joining us online, you can ask your question on our Q&A portal at texastribune.org/ask.
Thank you. Good morning. Marisa Limon Garza from Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center. This is my favorite place to nerd out with the Texas Tribune, so I'm so glad y'all are here. I do want to follow up on the last comment. For me, as an immigrant, advocacy organization at the front lines and seeing how we have so many different versions of immigration law, policy, and practice that have impacted generations of El Pasoans, the use of B-roll on broadcast is what's most problematic to me. And the parroting of whatever our enforcement agency says is equally problematic. And I know this is not a broadcast necessarily panel, but please know that that is of grave concern. We have gone to some of the editorial teams, producers at the stations and have flagged it. And there's a real commitment to not stop and to add more nuance. So I'm really grateful for journalists like y'all for continuing to do that important work. My real question is, we are here, the tip of Texas, far out west. We are now really engaged front and center in a battle with our governor, with this administration, and for kind of the future for Texas, or at least that's how it can feel. And oftentimes, we've done our fights at the federal level. The local is national, is inherently national and transnational. How can we make more of a presence for El Paso in the central Texas corridor where, Austin will look south to the valley, they will look to San Antonio, to Dallas, to Houston, but how can we get attention over here and be thought of as thought leaders and partners, not just coming to our location, but how do we take this message beyond to where the halls of power are without just having to have our own people in Austin to do the work and the education when we are doing so much with so little resource?
Thanks for those comments, Marisa. I appreciate it very much. It kind of touches on what I talked about earlier with voter participation. That the next step in the civic process is to get engaged beyond voting and get our message out to Austin, or get Austin to come to us. That's why I'm particularly grateful to have this Texas Tribune event today, to get people out to see what's actually coming here. That isolation that Angela and Alfredo have talked about does work against us in that area. There are only a couple of direct flights to Austin every day. It's El Paso is a difficult place to get to, but I think again it kind of comes back to we have to elevate that as something that we collectively decide is important in El Paso, or for El Paso. So when we talk about the top issues in this community, I think better connecting El Paso to state leadership has to be important. But I want to be realistic here too. Even if we do that right now, we're going to meet resistance. So I was talking earlier about how one of the beautiful things about El Paso is we feed people first and we talk politics second. The reason that can happen is we have a really good NGO structure. Marisa's organization is part of that, but Annunciation House is kind of the lead. Annunciation House handling these repeated humanitarian crises has actually been one of the few things that works in our immigration system, which is shattered. The state has now decided that they want to target Annunciation House and break down that one thing that's working. So I think we have to be realistic about some of the political obstacles that we're going to face, which aren't even necessarily Texas obstacles, they're kind of national. But we have to get a seat at the table somehow. Improving voter participation will help with that. It won't solve it by itself, but getting the community to sort of agree that increasing our voice in Austin and in Washington is going to be important.
Hi, good morning. My name is Melissa Lagunas. I just have a question. It was, you mentioned, Mr. Moore, previously you had a newsroom of like 60 people and it decreased to 10. My question is kind of like, what do you see for the future of journalism? Because a lot of this, the climate with politics and with what people are reading and what they're looking at is based on these emotions and the changes that are being, like the journalists want you to feel a certain way. And like you were saying, Miss Angela, about people not being educated, not knowing these issues and stuff, they're basically going with these emotions that the media is trying to project on the people, and that's the way they're going with their votes, and that's the way they're discussing these issues and stuff. There's a lot of emotion that's involved. They're not understanding the full, the objectivity of these issues. And I mean, like you guys have this big challenge presenting them objectively, but it's just kind of, it seems like it's really overshadowed by these people that want to sway the public to feel the way they're trying to make you feel, as opposed to what the reality is. And that just seems very frustrating, I think. Just, where do you guys see journalism heading? Like, this is just the culture of, like I said, the sentiment of people and politics and stuff.
So that's the existential question. I'm sure each of you might want to take a bit of a stab at that.
Well, I do think we do have to do a better job of telling our own stories from here, having context. And that's why, Marisa, I didn't answer your question, but you are such an expert here on the border, and your voice beyond the border means a lot. So reaching out to some of these news organizations, making sure you're the high profile person on, PBS NewsHour or even Fox News or whichever, and get, op-eds, all of that. But we do have to, emotion, we've always, politicians have always used that to get votes. They bash the border like a big piñata and you get votes. And, fear gets votes.
And money.
And money, yeah. And, Operation Lone Star has meant money for counties away from the border who say they have an emergency. So it does pay off, but we have to fight that and realize, we're not going to end that idea of emotional appeal, but providing more a reality check from here makes a huge difference.
But the question that Marisa also, part of that question was the B-roll, which is something you've talked about
That's
a lot.
lifelong fight of wallpaper B-roll, but it's gotten
You
worse.
want to define B-roll for the non-journalists?
B-roll is the video that they use when the anchor's talking about, crisis on the border. I do not want to see that tiny chain link fence being torn down again because, no, the border is not wide open. Nobody got into they were actually already in the U.S. camping along the river, and they didn't get to the actual real border steel fence. So those people did face consequences, the ones who actually did some of the tearing down. But if you see that video, you think, oh my God, everyone's broken down the border fence and we're all, in danger now. So yes, you have to stress as you're doing, don't use that video over and over again.
On the emotion issue, fear is a tremendous motivator, and it unfortunately wins audiences. So part of the answer has to be support media that doesn't do that. And part of the issue again is everything's become nationalized, and we don't have local voices talking about things. So we have to figure out ways to build up local infrastructure so that we can have conversations. And we have media here in town that you can support and listen to, and there are also media nationally that don't play into that game. Support them, but I'm not going to minimize the ability of fear to bring audiences to the table.
Support local media. Subscribe to El Paso Matters, El Paso Times. I'm serious. They're about to have their annual, their semester
Membership drive, your local public radio stations.
But it's so
wherever you
important
are.
to call in and support them and keep journalism healthy. Because if you don't tell these stories, I mean, someone else and some national person is going to come in. Someone asked a question about these people who have a zillion followers, and they go around the country and with their cameras, and they'll take video of this or that. I just read a story about organizations, or not really organizations, but individuals who are moving their platforms to the Darien Gap in the Panama area to show these hordes of people coming in. Again, fear, and so support as much as you can the local media landscape, the reporters, to try to tell these stories
and express what you want. But talk about the airport. I mean, there are a lot of misperceptions. You were flying out yesterday.
It's kind of, I thought it was funny, but I had a 6 a.m. flight, so I parked the car at the airport parking lot, and I saw a bus pulled in with a bunch of people, young people, getting off, and there were some people walking who did not seem to be from El Paso, but they were talking about, look at the hordes of migrants that are, we better hurry up to get to the TSA to get in, because it's a lot of people coming in. And I'm checking in the gate, and I looked around, a bunch of soccer players from a local high school, and cheerleaders taking photos of one another. But it's that mindset that we have. You see buses, and it must be a migrant going to Denver or Chicago on a free bus, etc.
So we have time for another question here, but so that we keep on schedule, my colleague Ian, who is moderating our next panel, is right over there by the coffee. If our panelists can assemble with them so that we can get started, but we'll have our last question here.
Good morning. I'm Elizabeth O'Hara, the one that Bob called out a few moments ago as the recovering journalist. First of all, thank you all very much for the panel. I think that it's very important. For those of you who are not aware, these are titans in their industry, award-winning journalists who are often talking about El Paso and telling our story. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Question, yes, I actually think that does deserve a round of applause. My question is for Bob, but Angela and Alfredo, if you want to answer this, please jump in. El Paso Matters recently did a story about one of the challenges for the business community here in El Paso being that we don't pay as much as Austin and Dallas and Houston. You all know that I happen to be the chairwoman for the El Paso Chamber. So from a business perspective, can you kind of make the pitch for small and mid-sized businesses? How do they wrap their heads around trying to pay more, hit that living wage, kind of build that community up that we envision at the same time that we're living in these pre-COVID years where they may still have loans that they received from the federal government. They have increased costs due to, various increases. How do we get around that as a business community?
It is El Paso's defining challenge right now. So just for those who aren't familiar with it, the average private sector wage in El Paso is 62% of the state and national averages. As a result of that, we are exporting human talent at a frightening rate, and our population is in decline. We had fewer babies born in El Paso last year than we did in 1979 when we had 300,000 fewer people. And that's largely because young adults are leaving the community for other economic opportunities. So I think first is identifying and embracing the challenge while also recognizing that these small mom and pop businesses are not setting out to underpay their workforce, right? I don't think anybody wants to start a business and say my hallmark is going to be I'm going to pay people nothing. So I think it's going to require changing the mix of jobs we have here and getting past this argument that El Paso lacks skilled workforce. We've built skilled workforce. They're living in Dallas and Houston and Phoenix and San Antonio. So we need to do a better job of connecting our workforce development efforts and our recruitment efforts together. We'll actually talk about this more on the education panel. But I think Liz has sort of hit the defining issue. It's one of those issues that I mentioned earlier where El Paso has real problems. They're just not the ones you hear about. That's our key challenge right now.
Well, I just wanted to thank all three of you for not only sharing your expertise, but for your deep commitment to El Paso. Alfredo has lived here for a very long time, even as he worked for another news organization. And I think that we're just lucky to have all three of you here and covering El Paso and covering the border and really kind of finding those places where we can collaborate and tell the real stories that are coming out of this city. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Saida.